Hi there. So, recuperating, and thanks for all of your support. I'm very touched by the comments I've received. So I've got some things actually I want to talk about before the video tomorrow. Not that it's really related or anything, because I had been wanting to do for a while, beginning of the year video. And the funny thing is, you get so caught up in work and stuff that the only thing I've really been able to manage is those reading videos. So here's an opportunity to do something else. So the first thing I wanted to say is the original motorcycle of Pier 6, the Honda Superhawk, is now in the Smithsonian. So I guess you could say it's alongside Archie Bunker's chair. And I live in Washington, so when I have a chance, when I'm better, I'm going to go over there and see if I can't take some, just do a little reality TV with that in the Smithsonian and see if we can't, see if it might not be interesting so you can see the experience of seeing it in the museum. 2 weeks ago, when I pointed out the dichotomy, again, this whole Jordan Peterson thing is such a topic of ambivalence for me, because I think that his essential theory, the massive meaning theory, is so parallel to Pirsig that it's just so exciting. And I think that my mindset to be oriented towards Pirsig, to open up my mind, was in a large part because of Jordan Peterson's work. And I think the part in Jordan Peterson's work that opened me up to a large extent was how influenced Jordan Peterson is by pragmatism. William James, of course, pragmatism influences Pirsig, so maybe William James is the guy to look at. So I have been reading more of that. But what I wanted to say is, because I have this ambivalence, liking the theory, but not liking a lot of the political, or just thinking that a lot of the political stuff, even though it's useful to a lot of people, young men, etc., and maybe we do need to infuse responsibility into this chaos, or the antidote for chaos, is not Pirsigian per se, because it's too structured, it's too subject-object. But it was interesting, because that same day I put that video out, Jordan Peterson tweeted this: "If you allow yourself to be informed by the reality manifesting itself as you struggle forward, your notions of what is important will change. You will reorient yourself, sometimes gradually and sometimes suddenly and radically." So that is really kind of some of a coincidence, huh? He's kind of making me stay focused on what actually is going on, rather than becoming all subject object myself and saying this is good, this is bad, because that is certainly Pirsigian. So another guy I want to bring up, who is unnecessarily objectionable to people because they associate him with being a supporter of Donald Trump, and I suspect 50% people who are not apolitical, the few and far between are apolitical. I'm hoping that there's many of you here, because I think that it's important to see things outside of the realm of this this charade, this theater, this song and dance, the smoke and mirrors. If you are Orange Man bad, then you're not going to like Scott Adams. But I keep saying I think he's a brujo. And so there's two very interesting things I want to bring up. And one is that he is explaining this concept, I guess, extracted from his book Loser Think, in which there's an artist's view of the world and there's an engineer's view of the world, and you know exactly where I'm going with that. So the artists, the romantics, tend to see things as a totality, as a whole, as a gestalt, and because it's a whole system of seeing things, and just inserting a fact isn't going to change the ecology of the belief too much. But with an engineer, classic, they're looking at things that they're breaking things down into pieces. So changing the fact. So if a new fact is inserted, then if the evidence is reasonable, then they're going to change their minds. And I think that is very interesting in this respect, because, and this isn't to say that there's anything wrong with one person or the other, but one of them makes a much better motorcycle mechanic, if you know what I mean. One is able to operate in the practical world a lot better. So in that 50% of importance in the human interaction with the world is solved by the classicists and the classics. And in these political times, they are better able to negotiate the political landscape. And also in the last chapter, remember that he kind of says, Phaedrus sees things as a totality. And remember what a hard time Phaedrus has. He like goes through all the material with confirmation bias in order to get to what the supporting facts he needs to support the thing he already believes. And interesting. And he sees things as a totality, whereas Robert says, I'm more of a motorcycle mechanic, more of a classic guy. I see I'm updating my system depending on the next fact that comes in. So it's interesting. It's that same two movies on one screen divide he keeps talking about. So I kind of like that, the way that's been coming up lately. So there's another thing he did that's really interesting, and this is probably 3 weeks ago at this point. I meant to talk about it then. He did a video on restructuring one's, let's just say, relationship with anxiety, an antidote to anxiety. And so he's talking about the medical community starting to use hallucinogens to start to cure all manner of mental illness. And it's such an outrage that these substances are still illegal for use in the therapeutic community. It drives me crazy because, to restructure someone's thoughts over PTSD or attachment disorder or all these things that have really, that are marbled through someone's psyche. I mean, you need a total restructuring. You need a removal from subjective reality in order to be able to see, no, there's nothing wrong with you at all. This was a very unfortunate experience, and you can start again, really. You can start again in seeing and having a relationship with reality, and that relationship can be positive. So it makes me very upset that these substances are still illegal. He gives this analogy, and he says, how much anxiety would you have carrying a potato down the street and delivering it to someone? And you would have none because it's just a potato. Okay, how much anxiety would you have taking a Picasso painting and doing the same thing? The only difference is the value. You value the painting and you don't value the potato. So you need to learn how to be the potato. Now we talk a lot of value and quality, but set that aside for a minute. So and let's just look at this. You need to be the potato, not the painting, because if you're the potato, you have nothing to protect, and we call this an ego death. So why do hallucinogens allow you to experience ego death? Because, as I was saying, they remove preconceived notions. You just see reality for what it is. Now, it's going to be your subjective reality, granted, but it's going to be your subjective reality in terms of you as a biological creature in the world, rather than someone with a whole bunch of rules and preconceived notions in their head. And that's going to allow your ego to be seen as so much less important, and you can actually start engaging in the world. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the ego death is very much like the peace of mind that you need to connect with quality sometimes. It's one of the big traps, is the ego trap. I'm going to put a link to that Scott Adams video because there's a whole lot more in there. After that, like the Brujo, he walks you through this thought experiment that is going to reproduce the hallucinogenic experiment. Okay, so he's kind of directing you, holding your hand through this experience. And in this is very interesting because he's going to show you one way of understanding how quality creates the universe, in the sense that your reality really is subjective, and that an agreement about that enough of agreement about that subjective reality creates the patterns that we call things. So if anyone wants to watch that, we can talk about that. Another thing I want to talk about is strange attractors in dynamical systems. I've been thinking about this a lot. One way you look at it in psychology is that these moods that you are born, these orientations towards certain moods, emotions that you're born with, that are hardwired because these have evolved, and your personality develops around this, the parts of your personality. So you go into these moods. Something, of course, can come from the outside and trigger these moods, but something from the inside can put you in these states. And if it's coming from the inside, it's kind of like it is like a strange attractor, you know, and a strange attractor will be interesting to you for a while. You'll stay in this mood for a while, and then you'll move to another mood. Well, what is happening? This is what I think is happening with any kind of strange attractor. And remember that you don't have to experience strange attractors as a conscious being. This is an underlying mechanism of the universe. It is very much like the mechanism of quality detection, because anything can detect quality. That means an atom, a string in string theory, anything is always going to want more freedom, always want things to get better. So it's always going to want to go towards novelty, towards quality. Not that novelty and quality are the same, but I think often they are. Something about novelty says, oh, this is going to open things up. This is going to make things more free. This is going to give me this thing that I need. You know, maps of meaning is very much, this occurs in Peterson's theory of maps of meaning a lot, the novelty. And that strange attractor is novelty. So one way to look at how quality creates the universe, or how quality detection, how quality works, is that it becomes that novel thing that you are oriented towards. And you circle around that for a while until you absorb it, until you understand it, until it becomes part of you. And now you have another layer, and you move on to the next thing. In terms of the personality, you cycle through anger until you've had enough of it, and then you go towards happiness until, you know, that's not really... the happiness is not as realistic anymore, and then so that's how the moods orient around strange attractors. Strange attractors, I think, is something that can really enlighten us as to Pirsig's theory. One thing I wanted to say is that there's a podcast coming out with Erik Torenberg, and he has a podcast called Village Global. I'm not going to be on that podcast. He has another podcast, and I'm not sure of the name, but it's more, Village Global is more tech and venture capital discussions. He has another one that's more the humanities. So I'm going to be on that. So I'm going to let you know when that comes out, because we had a great discussion. And the reason I'm mentioning it ahead of time is because Erik Torenberg is someone who is as influenced by Pirsig as I am. And that is exciting. Now, I've met some other of you through this channel, which really makes me feel good, you know, that I have someone to talk to about this. But Erik is also, I mentioned this before, written synopses of both Zam and Lila, and they're on Quora. I'll put links to that. But we had a really good conversation. He asked me some some questions that that made me able to talk about Pirsig potentially in a way that is more understandable to more people. So I've really enjoyed that interview, and I'll tell you when it comes out, or podcast. And so as this reading series draws to a close, you know, we've got chapter 29C, then we've got 30, 31, 32, and then the epilogue, so another month or so. I'm starting to feel like I can never say that I'm going to completely have a handle on Pirsig's work, but I'm starting to say I have enough of a handle on it at this point that it's really become ingrained in me. It's been a strange attractor, and it's starting to be absorbed, and it's starting to build me as a person. My whole motivation with doing this channel was to be able to integrate it as a therapist, or just, you know, in terms of making it a way to live a better life. So I think what I'm going to start doing are small 5-minute clips that are a little bit more structured, and this is how they're going to run. So I'll read a clip from Pirsig. I'll explain what I think it means. I'll give suggestions as to how we can apply it to life, and then I'll give a tip as to how to apply it to life, and then maybe a closing statement. So tell me what you all think of that. So tomorrow, 29C, and I hope that made sense, and I'll see you tomorrow.